Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of I Came for Science, a show about sex and reproduction and inclusion in STEM. I'm your host, Laura Sirot. I'm a professor of biology, and I've been studying animal sex for the past 30 years. Please join me as we normalize talking about sex and what we know about it, as well as the journeys of the scientists who study it. Today, at the end of the show, I will be joined by a co-host, Natalia, who's a science communicator and my former student, to discuss this episode. So just a note for our listeners for today, I want to give you a definition and a content warning before you listen to the episode. First, the definition. Our guest today uses the term phenotype, and this is a term used in biology to describe the traits of an individual. So it could be physical traits or behavioral traits or even physiological traits. So she'll use the term phenotype, and that's what it means, the traits of an individual. And the second is a content warning. The guest and I talk about sexual assault and sexually manipulative relationships in this episode. And so we want to give you a heads up ahead of time so you can decide whether to listen. Today, we're so fortunate to have my colleague Eileen Hebets here to talk about her journey through STEM. And she is a professor of biological sciences at University of Nebraska, and also past president of the Animal Behavior Society, where I first met her when she talked about her research on reproductive biology and other aspects of biology of spiders, but also about how important life experiences shaped her research questions. So welcome to I Came for Science, Eileen.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, so happy to have you here. Could you start by telling us about the area of reproductive biology that you study?
Sure. So a lot of my research is pretty broad in animal behavior, but the pieces of it that are probably most relevant to this podcast are really trying to understand how individuals of two different mating types come together to reproduce. And so that involves a lot of research looking at the communication and the signals that are used to attract a mate, to decide upon a mate, and then looking at the dynamics of reproduction as well. So there are some pretty crazy things that happen in spiders that kind of challenge our understanding of evolutionary processes. And so one of my favorite things about the group that I study is that they kind of constantly pose challenges to our intuitions and our understanding.
That is so cool. Can you tell me, I noticed you said mating types and not male and female. Was that purposeful?
It was purposeful. Yeah. I'm really trying actually to get away from, I'm trying to see if it works, to get away from using male and female when talking about reproduction, because I think by using those terms, there's a lot of kind of baggage and a lot of assumptions that come along with those terms. And my kind of intellectual journey right now, and one of the grants that I have in review at the moment, is really trying to see if we could kind of take a sex-neutral approach to understanding mating systems, and to see if that changes our understanding of why individuals of each mating type mate the number of times that they do, when and how mating plugs evolve, how post-copulatory sexual selection influences decisions to mate or remate in the future. So I'm just really interested right now in kind of that space and in exploring how far we can get. And it might be a total failure. We might need to, rely on those sex-specific terms, but I'm just really interested in kind of exploring that space right now.
That is fascinating. It makes me think, at the very least, it would change some of the vocabulary and terminology we use. I think, like in my area of study, I study post-copulatory sexual selection and reproduction. And one area of research is something that's been called strategic ejaculation, right? And that's when males change the number or quality of sperm that they transfer to females, depending on social environment or the qualities of the females or their own experience with mating in the past. But in females, when they do the exact same thing, we don't call it strategic anything. We call it differential allocation, which is so much more passive, right? And if we were sex neutral, I could imagine we would just use the same term for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So interesting.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where your work goes with this. Great. Well, I really wanted to talk to you, and I invited you on the show to talk about how experiences you had shaped the questions you asked. And I was stunned, impressed, and grateful that you shared with a very large audience a very personal experience that had shaped your journey through STEM. And I was wondering if you would be willing to share that with our audience now.
Sure. So I'll maybe start with the science first, and then kind of explain the motivation behind the science. And for that, I'll give a little bit of background about wolf spiders and the system that I work on. Males mature before females, typically a week, maybe 2 weeks. And so by maturing, they get their sexual organs, they start producing sperm, and the females are not yet mature. But these males are very motivated to mate, and when they come upon pheromones from a mature female, that elicits courtship. And so these males will start courting, and they will often direct their courtship towards any spider that's present. It doesn't even need to be the same species always. So whether it's a mature female or an immature female. So I kind of had learned this biology about these spiders when I first started working with the system as an undergraduate. So I'm going to kind of put a pin in that story right there, and then go back to my personal experiences where, maybe starting around high school, certainly into college, I was realizing that I had a very specific kind of phenotype that I found attractive in partners, and it was specifically height. I was very attracted to very, very tall individuals, much taller than myself. And I just became kind of intrigued by how, a group of friends could walk into a bar or a party, and all of us would find different individuals attractive. And some of my choices were not always the best choices. And so I really started kind of questioning, why do I have such a strong affinity towards this phenotype? So it was about this time during grad school when I started to face the reality that I was sexually abused by someone outside of my family as a child. And it was something that I had not dealt with, I had not talked to anyone about up until that time. And so I started to kind of question whether that was playing some role in my own interactions with individuals in that realm. And so as soon as I got a postdoc position at Cornell, I had the luxury of a little bit of time to kind of do whatever I wanted to do. And so I had been wanting to run this experiment for so long, kind of as soon as I had started dealing with my own childhood sexual abuse, I wanted to see if something similar happened in spiders. Like if organisms, not nearly as complex as humans, if an experience of harassment by a mature male before you're mature influences mate choice, then in some way I felt like that would kind of verify, it would give some validity to my own irrational, what I felt was irrational attractions and preferences. And so I did a study where I exposed immature females to courtship advances from mature males repeatedly over time. And then when those females matured, I paired them with males that either looked the same or looked different as the male they had experience with. And shockingly, I found a really clear pattern in that females actually mated preferentially with males of a phenotype that they were familiar with. So males that looked like males that they had experienced prior. And in spiders, their decisions are often a lot more clear than other animal groups because they actually cannibalized the males in the other groups.
That's pretty clear.
That's pretty clear.
It can't be much clearer than that. Yeah. That's heavy. That's big. And it's sort of amazing that you were sort of processing your own experience yourself and then at the same time asking scientific questions about it. And amazed. Yeah. It made me think. So I shared with you earlier, but I'll share with our audience that I was in a sexually manipulative, I guess is what you could call it, relationship starting when I was 15 with a former teacher and mentor, and until I was about 23 years old. And, obviously remembered that, knew I was in that, but didn't connect it with my science at all until I heard your talk last year. Oh, and then I started thinking about, because what I study is female control over reproductive decision making. Like that's been the theme through my research for the past 30 years. And all of a sudden, when I was listening to your talk, I kind of got the chills just like I did right now and thought, oh my God, that's what I've been studying. And I don't think it's the only reason I studied it. I was fortunate to work with Barb Smuts at the University of Michigan, and she's well known for research on sex and friendship in baboons, but also on sexual conflict and male aggression against females. And so certainly her influence played a big role in my intellectual development and choices. But also I think my personal experience kind of, I would say, predisposed me to be interested in kind of ways that males attempt to manipulate female reproductive decision making and strategies that females use to either manipulate males or counteract the male strategies. So it was really a powerful moment for me when I was listening to you.
Yeah, that is really fascinating.
Yeah. So can you back up and tell us more generally about your journey through STEM and becoming, traveling into a science career? Were there important moments where you either feel discouraged or encountered obstacles, or that you felt were important moments that made you feel included and encouraged to stay in STEM?
Yeah, so I started, so I always loved biology, even as a kid. I loved being outside. I loved animals. I, like many, I think, young biologists, I was fascinated by sharks. And so for a period of time in high school, I was sure that I was going to study sharks. And actually the college that I applied to and went to, Albion College in Michigan, had a shark expert there. And that was part of the reason, it was part of what attracted me to Albion. But when I got there, it turns out that I found an amazing mentor, second mother, kind of, one of these people that you are lucky to meet in your lifetime, individuals, in Dr. Gail Stratton, who was a faculty member at Albion. And I took a class from her in vertebrate zoology that I just loved. It was the first time I could take an elective, and it was one of the most fun, engaging classes I had taken at college yet. And I was in the honors program, needed to do a research project and needed to pick a mentor. And so I asked her if she would be my mentor. And her response was that if I work on spiders, yes. And so I didn't know what I wanted to work on. And I was so fortunate that she had a National Geographic grant at the time to do research down in Mississippi. And so she hired me on the summer between my junior and senior year to go down to Mississippi and do wolf spider research. And she was then, and to this day, still the most important influence and person in my scientific life. She, as you can imagine, maybe as a 19-year-old from Michigan going down to Mississippi by yourself, it's culturally very different. It's very far from home. I was living by myself. And she and her then partner, now wife, just kind of took me under their wing and were so welcoming and supportive and encouraging. And so it's really because of her that I went to graduate school. And I didn't know anything about graduate school. I didn't know where that path would lead me. And I remember as I was applying, she called me up one day in the house I was living in my senior year and was asking what I was thinking about the schools. And I was clearly distraught and didn't know what I was thinking. And she said, hang on, I'm going to come pick you up. And she came and picked me up, and we went for a drive through the cornfields of Michigan. And just kind of talked through options and my strengths and her belief in me. And so for me, having individuals like that throughout my life have been really important, and Gail is by far the most important person. But I'll say, at the same time, I experienced the exact opposite at different times in my career. So at following my master's advisor, I wanted to go on to a PhD program and did not want to stay there. And in my memory, there were multiple tactics that were taken to try to get me to stay, one of which was that there's no way I could make it on my own, that I was not smart enough, I was not creative enough, and that only under his mentorship would I succeed. And I really needed to stay there because I just didn't have what it takes to make it in science. That argument changed at different points to, you're going to do great wherever you go, and wouldn't it be great if you could stay here and we could do things together. But that was a time when, I definitely had a lot of questions and self-doubt. And I started off my PhD program, I think, with a lot of self-doubt and questioning. And then I think, I alluded to this when we talked previously, but I had a pretty impactful experience during my PhD in that I had a committee member who, it's kind of a long story, but ultimately made sexual advances towards me. And it was a relationship that was complicated and complicated personally, complicated professionally. He was a member of my committee and caused me a lot of stress and sleepless nights and, challenges in terms of how do I navigate this in a position where someone has power, direct power over me and my future. And I don't know, you shared earlier that you were in a relationship with a former teacher. I don't know if you might have felt a little bit of that too. Power dynamics that come into play to put you in situations where it's kind of extra challenging.
Yeah, that's a good question. First, thanks for sharing all that. I would say that since I was so young, I was 15, when it started. It was before I started my professional career. So he didn't have much power over my professional career, but I was like a yo-yo emotionally, in right. terms of, so there was that. But I would say there are other people certainly, and especially during grad school, who just behaved outside of the realm of what seems professionally appropriate, and, either just sort of too friendly, right? And, and what I really wanted when I went to grad school was just a pure mentor. I didn't need to be friends or anything like that. Right, and even mentors who tried to be friends, I would say it got complicated. I didn't like that. And I ended up working with Jane Brockman, who is well known for being very to the point. We weren't gonna, right. I adore her, but we weren't gonna be friends. She would just kept lines very clear, and that worked the best for me. And I think maybe that's a response to some of the more mixed up, complicated relationships I had previously, that I really responded well to that clarity.
Right.
Yeah. So what helped you navigate those hurdles that you faced, the people, the words that people said to you, the ways they made you feel? How did you, I mean, some people might have left. I almost left STEM after my first year in grad school, and I know others who did. What helped you to persist?
I would say that consistently throughout my life, I have had the privilege of being surrounded by wonderful friends and supportive friends and different people at different stages of my life. But that has been a constant. And for sure, when I was getting my PhD, I distinctly remember following a lunch with this committee member where he leaned forward in the lab and tried to kiss me. And I got out of there and went back to my building and was meeting a then postdoc who was a good friend of mine to go for a run. And I just, changed my clothes and met her outside. And as soon as we started running, I just totally broke down. And she was amazing. She was so calm, and she listened and was rational and, understood all of the complications of my situation, given that this was a member of my committee. And I was also being funded by this person at the time. So I was on a research assistantship, and having her, she actually, I'm pretty sure she wrote the initial draft of an email of like, this is how you have to respond. This is what you have to say. And just really helped me kind of walk through that. Similarly during grad school when I started, and all of these things are probably intertwined. It was probably this experience that triggered, me suddenly needing to deal with my past abuse.
Yeah.
But I had another friend who, she would meet with me every weekend, and I bought a bunch of kind of self-help, sexual abuse survivor books, workbooks, and she would sit with me at a coffee shop every weekend.
Oh, gosh.
And work through these with me.
Wow. That's a good friend.
It really is. I was surrounded by amazing people throughout my career that I would have never made it through any one of these experiences without them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, grad school brought up for me my whole relationship during my teens. I don't know, something about it, like men being in charge and, I don't know, there's something about having to be independent. I'm not sure what it was about grad school, but I would not have gotten through without friends like you and a very good therapist and, to be able to talk about the intersections, but it brought up all sorts of memories and things that I hadn't thought about in a while. Yeah. Wow. Friends are good. I had one friend when I almost left grad school after my first year say to me, "You can't leave science. Science needs you." And I love that. I kind of love it as the motto for the show. Like, science needs you. And that was Amy Zan. And I keep it with me 25 years later.
Right. Well, and I think that's so true. And I think our stories are perfect examples of that, right? Like we have certain, and I know this is what your whole show is about, but it really resonates with me when I see people bring their lived experiences into their science in ways that open doors that we never even knew were there. Not only did we not know they were closed, but we didn't even know doors existed. And it's really because of the diversity of people and their perspectives and their questions that drive discovery forward. And so, science does need everybody. It needs people who don't feel like they belong, because those are the people who are probably most likely to push science forward. So then the challenge is, how do we, change the culture so that we make everyone feel like they belong and are supported. And I think that's more challenging.
Yeah. And I like that you said, how do we change the culture? Because I think sometimes we try to train people to fit in to STEM rather than changing STEM to grow into something new and beautiful and expand. And so I really like the way you put that. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. As both of us unfortunately know, these types of sexual harassment of students is still ongoing. And maybe it will always be ongoing, but hopefully less so than when we were in grad school. But I was wondering if you were, and maybe you've had this opportunity, but if you were to give advice to other students, undergrads, grad students who were in similar situations of being harassed in some way by someone in power over them, what would you say to them?
I think the most important thing is to find, obviously, have good friends by your side, but I didn't have anyone at my university at the time, anyone that was kind of equal stature that I felt comfortable going to for
equal
help.
Stature to the person who was
to
harassing.
the person who was harassing.
Yeah.
And I think that we really need allies. I think everybody needs allies in all positions. And so I think, my piece of advice for students, and I was actually just meeting with a student in my office a few days ago where I was saying, there are certain things that you need to support you emotionally, mentally, scientifically, academically, in all of these different areas as a graduate student. And you might not, it's unlikely, in fact, that you will find that all in one person. And so I think that it's really important for graduate students to think about all of the different ways that they need support and find the appropriate people that they feel comfortable with and safe with that they can go to. And so, for any students out there right now experiencing harassment, I think that in general, there are probably more people around now than there were when you and I were graduate students that are aware of situations, that would be willing to advise, step up to the plate, stand in for you, back you up, listen to you. And so I think just finding those people and finding them early on in your grad career is really important.
That's great. So what would you say to people who are mentors of students, but don't yet feel like they've played a role as advocate or ally for students who have been in these kind of manipulative or inappropriate recipients of these inappropriate behaviors? I feel like some of my colleagues are hesitant to come forward and talk to colleagues about inappropriate behavior because it's uncomfortable, or maybe it would put them in a bad position if these people might be in a position of power over them at some point. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, I think your points are right on, and a lot of people are very hesitant about kind of rocking the boat or saying anything against a colleague. I think what's really important is for colleges, for departments, for universities, for societies to have processes in place where students and faculty can go to report things like this so that it's not all on them and they aren't the ones that are responsible for taking action. And a great example of this is that the Animal Behavior Society over the last 4 years or so worked really hard to develop a process whereby if someone violated our code of conduct, there now is a whole process in place of what happens. And so if you see a violation, all you have to do is report it. And there are numerous ways that you can report it, and you can report it anonymously. And then you can go, to the documents online and look at what exactly happens after I report something. and you can see the whole process, and you don't need to be a part of that process. You might get contacted to be interviewed, but it takes it kind of takes you out of the equation. So hopefully people feel safer and more comfortable and are more likely to speak up and report these things when you're not putting yourself in any kind of a risk or uncomfortable situation with a colleague. So I would say for all of the allies out there, if you're a faculty member at a university, look and see, is there a process in place? What is that process? Is it sufficient? And if not, work on it, get together with colleagues and ensure that there is something in place that is satisfactory so that you know what you can do when a student comes to you with some of those issues.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was realizing that also it takes the burden off the allies, right? Because if you're an ally or if you're an advocate, like people come to you and it's a time burden, but it's an emotional burden and it's you feel a responsibility of doing something. It's a lot. And so it's almost like, I don't know how to express it without it sounding badly, but like you sort of get penalized for being someone that people can come to talk to, as opposed to another colleague who maybe isn't someone that people feel comfortable talking to and they don't have those responsibilities. But if there's just a process, then it sort of takes that inequity out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I'm just so pleased you're doing this podcast. I'm
Thank you.
To listen to the other episodes.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're really fortunate to have had this opportunity to talk to you and for our audience to listen to your experience and your wisdom. So thank you for joining I Came for Science. Natalia, what are your thoughts on this episode? What did it make you think about?
It made me think about a lot of things, honestly. Having been a grad student, I can really empathize, just hearing from other grad students that had negative experiences with their advisor or their teacher. And I just feel so incredibly grateful that my experience could not have been more opposite. And I look back on that relationship as being one of the healthiest non-toxic relationships with a male supervisor. And I really treasure that. The other thing that came up for me was and Eileen hit on this, but it is so important to have the proper avenues in place for reporting sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, not just in academia, but in all areas of our life, including the workplace or in school. And speaking from personal experience, when I had a stalkerish type situation in my workplace, I reported it to my employer. And for fear of not wanting to get this person fired or lose their job, I didn't push for the proper reporting measures that you're supposed to take in these situations. And my employer was fine with that. It's almost as if they also didn't want to escalate things. And so if there's any takeaways from this, I would if you're in a position of power and you are managing people either in the school or the workplace, and someone comes to you because they're uncomfortable, I think it's really common that they're not going to want to escalate things. And it is your job as that employer or as that person, that teacher, that person of power to encourage them to do that, because it just makes it, for all the reasons you would expect, it's the right thing to do. It makes things safer for everyone in the workplace, not just that one individual, because chances are if they're doing it to one person, they're going to try and do it again to someone else or already are. So that's just one thing that I would just really stress from this episode. Yeah, I just want to thank Eileen for sharing her experience and making it okay to talk about how your experiences come into the decisions we make as adults and giving a space to talk about that. Because I think that's really awesome that she did that and was able to kind of bring this topic to light that I have never heard about before.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this and also your own experiences and your own wisdom. great advice for those of us who have power over other people to use that power for good and to support the people who we work with. Thanks so much, Natalia. And I want to thank our production team, Sam Carmel and Isabel Espinoza, for their work on this podcast as well.